So the Battlefield 6 beta has concluded, and by statistics, it was one of the most, if not the most successful beta in Battlefield history. Now, that's not to say that the developers are just taking their success and running with it and not changing anything. They're listening to feedback from the community. And some would say this is different from past Battlefield titles, where they don't really change much between the beta and the full release. Battlefield recognized some of the complaints from their community, put out a statement today addressing those complaints and saying, we are working on these things. Now, one of the things that many die-hard Battlefield players complained about with the beta was the pace of play and how it felt like this game was trying to codify itself or make itself more like Call of Duty. They didn't like the smaller maps, they didn't like the exploitative movement, they didn't like the pace of play. It didn't feel like Battlefield to them, it felt like more like Call of Duty. And Battlefield put out a statement today basically saying, hey, we hear you. We're removing exploitative movement, we're adding penalties for people who are moving while shooting and jumping, and we're going to return Battlefield to its roots, and the full release is going to have more larger maps that make the pace of play feel more like Battlefield. Now, I think this is a good change, and of course there is various degrees to it, right? You could take it too far to where the game feels like you're playing something like Escape from Tarkov, which I don't think Battlefield players want. But at the same time, Battlefield players want Battlefield. They play Battlefield because they want Battlefield and not Call of Duty, and I honestly think that people, by and large, are over this movement craze. It's honestly why Call of Duty announced that they're not having tactical sprint in the new Call of Duty game, because people are just over it, right? So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down why movement just doesn't fit Battlefield, why that sort of movement doesn't fit Battlefield, and the problems it poses for developers in terms of balancing their game. Now, it's important to note that the bulk of what we're talking about with quote-unquote movement nerfs isn't actually nerfs to the base movement of the game. It's nerfs to exploits that we're letting people fire with hip-fire accuracy that is way too high while they're moving and b-hopping. It's accuracy that was way too high when people are ADSing while sliding, moving, b-hopping, all of that. It's exploits, not the base game movement so much that they're nerfing. Yes, they did say they're going to nerf a little bit of the momentum in terms of the movement, but most of the base movement that's in the game is going to stay. It's just the exploitative movement. So you'll notice I use that term throughout the video, exploitative movement, that is getting nerfed. So the first complaint that will come out of the movement community is, well, movement's skilled, bro. You just want to remove skill from your game. Blah, blah, blah. Well, one, Battlefield is a fun game. It's not meant to be the most competitive game. It's not meant to be the most try-hard game. It's not meant to be the little Timmy TTV game. Sorry to your COD players, that's just not how Battlefield rules. I'll say that. Number two, movement's not a skill in Call of Duty anymore. It's not. It's something everybody's doing. Everybody has the combination of buttons memorized to slide, cancel, to b-hop, to break people's cameras. It's not a skill if everybody's doing it. And number three, it's actually a crutch. Movement is a crutch in Call of Duty nowadays to basically say, hey, I can put myself in a bad position. I can position myself with my face in the barrel of the enemy's weapon and then use exploitative movement to break their camera and get myself out of the bad position I just put myself in. Where Battlefield's like, hey, you just put yourself in a bad spot. Enjoy respawning. That's how Battlefield rules. And so movement's gotten to a point where it's overused, it's a crutch, and honestly, everyday gamers are just kind of over it. And yes, that would be dumb if I didn't acknowledge some sort of skill element with movement, such as positioning, such as strafing, such as, some elements of movement in gunplay do require skill. Yes, and a game should not feel very stale to the point where it's like, oh, I'm just walking around with my weapon, like running in a very stale animation, and it feels really slow and clunky. I'm not saying that. I'm saying more so exploitative movement, and the movement that is just memorizing a combination of buttons to slide, cancel, or b-hop is the movement that doesn't require skill and the movement that Battlefield is moving away from. Now, they did add a lot of new movement mechanics to this game that are staying in the game. They're not removing those, so those will add an element of skill to the movement. But I'm mostly talking about the Call of Duty style movement that many Call of Duty players seem to want to bring to Battlefield. In essence, what I'm saying is Call of Duty players who think slide canceling and b-hopping are not skilled. Those are not skills. That is just memorizing simple buttons. Yes, I actually do agree that having some sort of fast-paced, fluid-feeling movement's good, as I just stated, but there is also a line to where if you're going to have that sort of movement, you have to make it skilled, which is where I think Battlefield 6 is actually achieving that goal. There is going to be ways to use movement to outplay your enemies, but it's not going to be in the way of Call of Duty where I'm just going to press 3 buttons and break this person's camera and hip fire or ADS with 100% accuracy while I'm full moving. That's not how it's going to work. It's going to work a different way. And especially like in Call of Duty, there's only so many variations of it, which is why they're adding like wall jumping back in the new Black Ops. there's just only so many variations of movement you can do, right? Slide canceling, B hopping, left to right, we get it, right? It gets boring after a while, and it's just not fun after a certain amount of time to go against, and it poses a lot of problems for the pacing of the game, especially in a game like Battlefield where pacing is so important, right? If you have everybody running at light speed, tack sprinting, slide canceling everywhere, breaking people's cameras, Battlefield's going to feel very congested and very fast paced when it's supposed to be a medium slow paced game that people can play at their own pace and have fun, right? There's a line where you don't want too many people camping and all of that, but there's also the line of you are going for a level of realism and a level of gunplay and a level of gameplay that differentiates itself from the Call of Duty franchise. If you just want to play Call of Duty, go play Call of Duty, right? But Battlefield is different. It's a different game. It's a different title. And one of the reasons I feel like having Call of Duty like movement in Battlefield is not a good idea is that sort of movement poses a lot of balancing problems for the developers of the game in terms of the controller and mouse and keyboard balance, right? In Call of Duty, if you have the ability to break someone's camera and have this extreme movement that causes you to have to make a very left to right movement with your mouse or joystick to compensate for somebody breaking your camera, of course you have to have very overpowered rotational aim assist to compensate for that. And that leads to a very unfun experience for people who are looking for skilled gunplay because they're getting killed, and then they see on their kill camera aim assist basically locking onto them as they round the corner before the human eye can even react to it. And so what Battlefield is doing is they're saying, hey, we're going to not have that sort of movement in our game, so there's not a justifiable reason to have overpowered rotational aim assist, and so we can balance our game in a very unique way. And the way that Battlefield 6 so far has balanced the controller and mouse and keyboard input, I think is very unique compared to other FPS titles right now, and it's honestly very fun, and I have no complaints about it as a mouse and keyboard player, and I'm sure controller players have their complaints a little bit about it, but crossplay is optional in this game as well. So the way they balanced it is basically this. They have very little to no rotational aim assist in this game. Instead, they opted for controller having less recoil than mouse and keyboard. I think Jack Frags did a video where it was like, hey, on average is about 33% less recoil than mouse and keyboard. And then you get to traditional slowdown when aiming near your target. So basically they're saying, you're not going to have to deal with the left to right movement of somebody breaking your camera, so you're not going to have to make these very fast herky-jerky movements with your controller joystick left to right over the axis constantly, so you don't need the rotational aim assist being overpowered. Get good and get skill with your aim, right? Your aim's mostly going to be up and down controlling recoil more than it is left to right. Yes, there's a little bit of tracking involved, but in Battlefield, not as much extreme tracking or flicking motions, right? So I think that's a very good way of balancing controller, mouse, and keyboard. And then if you're a controller player and you're just tired of dealing with mouse and keyboard players flicking everywhere, you can turn crossplay off and go play against other console players, which I think is a very good option. And I think crossplay needs to be an option in every FPS title because honestly speaking, I understand the point of view of like the dad getting home from work playing on their 70-inch TV, not wanting to deal with somebody who's been sitting in front of their computer all day playing aim labs, flicking onto them left and right, especially in a casual game like Battlefield. So I understand that, but I also think the way they balance controller and mouse and keyboard is a very skilled way of balancing, and honestly, it incentivizes skill in the gunplay, which is what Battlefield's looking for more than skill in the movement. And the last thing I'd say is, how is this movement craze working with Call of Duty? Warzone's at a point where pretty much it's being sunsetted and killed off because people are just done with cheaters and they're done with this overpowered rotational aim assist and exploitative movement. It's resulted in a very low interest in Call of Duty despite a high player count they may tout. It's resulted in a very low interest in the game, and people are just over it at this point, and it's why so many people flocked to the Battlefield 6 beta, and so many people liked the Battlefield 6 beta because it was different, and it was sort of like the FPS titles people remember playing when they were growing up. And again, this is not to say that Battlefield 6 should have movement that's like Escape from Tarkov, where you're moving like as slow as a freaking turtle, right? There's a balance to be struck, and I think that that's why they're still going to have sliding in the game. It's why they're still going to have sprinting and all these other modern-day movement mechanics. They're just removing exploitative movement, and they're adding more penalties for people who think that they're going to be able to round a corner, slide, jump, B-hop, and ADS with their weapon and get full accuracy. That's just not going to happen for you. So I think this is good. It'll help return Battlefield to its roots, and it'll help Battlefield feel more like Battlefield, while at the same time having a little bit of a modern feel to the movement. It'll be interesting to see how extreme the nerf is, because there is, like I said, you could go too far with it. But I just think the movement Timmies and the movement community need to pipe down a little bit, because they've overall killed the Call of Duty franchise at this point, and now they want to do the same thing to Battlefield.